also our speaker tonight, Rabbi, and doesn't really need an introduction to the issue, but for those who are not familiar, he is the founder of the Tanakh Study Center, which you have the access at www.tanakh.org. And he is an internationally acclaimed Bible scholar and pioneer of Jewish education on the internet. His essays on Parshat Shavuot reflect his thematic analytical approach, which blends the methods of modern scholarship with traditional approaches. As a Rabbi and Yeshiva Ha'aretz, he is best known for his ability to teach students how to study Tanakh. He lectures around the world. We're very fortunate to have him with us tonight to help us prepare for the upcoming holiday Shavuot. And as you heard a minute ago, maybe you weren't here, it's a good idea to have a finish for this year. The topic for tonight is Shavuot. What are we celebrating? The grain harvest, Matan, Torah, 4 weeks. So it's a pleasure to introduce me. I mean, this is part of the education, like this.
Most of the changes every 2 years. Yeah. So before we start, why would someone think that Shavuot is a holiday, it's a grain harvest holiday? I'll explain the title. What's the logic to that? Exactly, it says so. That's what it says. Why would anyone think it's a holiday to commemorate Matan Torah?
Doesn't say so.
It does say so in your siddur. It's our prayer, so you can't argue with the siddur. Pretty sure. And it is Matan. It's the time we got the Torah. Of course, it doesn't say that. If you read Chumash, it doesn't say that. If you study Chumash, it does. That's what we'll do. And why would you call it weeks? Why would you say we're celebrating weeks? Because that's the name of the holiday in our siddur, isn't it? So what I want to try and do in this shir today is try to explain why. Why weeks in Matan Torah is like a thing. They say that still? Yeah. To start with, I want to talk about, like most Israeli speakers, about war. But not our war, the word war. In Hebrew is what? Milchama. What 3-letter word is hiding in Milchama? Okay, you knew that? Now, what's the connection between lechem, which means bread or food, and war?
People fight over.
But people find
People fight over. Now, why do people fight over bread? Don't fight over donuts. They fight over bread. Why? Because people, ever since want to stay alive, and to stay alive, you need bread. Now, when there's a shortage of bread, you need to stay alive, and your survival is more important than your neighbors. And therefore, what do you need to do? You have to kill someone to get bread, because you have to stay alive. But before you have to kill other people, there are other ways to get bread. What do you have to do? You can grow it. Now, you can be the most diligent farmer to grow bread, because you have to grow wheat, etc. But not everything is under your control. Okay? Who else do you need? What other power do you need for bread to grow?
Water.
You need water. Where's water come from? From the sky. And you need fertility from the ground. We just said in Marv, some may say, not whenever Marv says again, that we said in Shema, that if we don't follow God's laws, what will happen? Vatzar tashamayim, and there won't be matar. And Adama, and the land. Now, to the outsider who didn't read Chumash, it looks like the land gives us bread. People even mention in Menachem in the harvest. And it looks like water comes from the sky. An ancient man logically thought there's some power that's in charge of rain. And every ancient civilization had a rain god, had a rain dance. Because you need rain. Now, if you're living in Egypt, you get that river, so I can have a river god. That's where Pharaoh's in Denata. So, but the source of water is going to be a god you pray to, and you need fertility. In In Canaan, where you need rain and you need fertility, the rain god, his name was husband, or his name Hebrew Baal, and the fertility god, his wife was consort, was called Asherah. Aren't they come up all through the Torah? It's super logical, right? When someone needs bread before they have to go to war, they want to grow more, and they need rain and they need fertility. And who would they turn to? Baal and Asherah. And how would you get Baal on your theme? You praise him, you pray to him, you do a ritual, like you said, a rain dance. And idol worship makes perfect sense when you believe, when you understand there's powers of nature. And what's the word in Hebrew for power?
El.
El. And therefore, what do we call God, small g? Elim, or Elohim. The many gods is Elohim. Now, where does Chumash teach us that what appears to be many powers of nature is really one God who created everything? Isn't that the first topic of Chumash? The very first topic of Chumash is teaching you that what appears to be many powers of nature is really one power. How does Chumash teach you that? By making a mistaken grammar. Because what's the word for many powers? Elohim. Conjugated in the singular. And we say Vayomer Elohim or Vayas Elohim. Who makes man, but he has board members all of a sudden. That's that. But what I'm trying to explain to you, that ever since day one, the concept of a week has been a mega theme in Chumash, correct? Because what's Chumash trying to teach you? Because it's talking to, in the beginning, to all humankind, that if you want bread, you need rain, you need fertility. What's the source of those powers of nature? Not multiple gods, but one God. And then comes the revolution of Chumash. What? It's not only knowing who that God is, but that God who's in charge of all the powers of nature, based on what does he give you rain and give you fertility? Not based only on your prayer, but you pray to remember that that God gives you sustenance and prosperity, rain based on your behavior. Don't we say it every day in Shema? Now, that's fundamental to the essence of Chumash. It's a mega theme in Chumash. And it's a revolution in religion, because we call it ethical monotheism. You understand how the belief in one God is not just a technicality, but if someone really internalizes that, and they understand that then if you really believe that the way to have prosperity and have food on the table is by building a proper society, being kind and nice, and keeping these mitzvot of the Torah, that will lead people to good behavior. But it's not only that's how you have to behave. Rain and fertility work at a group level. It doesn't rain on one family and not on the other. Either weather is that it works on society. Same thing with fertility and plagues and things like that. And crops growing and things like that. And therefore, it's not enough for me to be good. We have to be good, which leads to a society where I have to care about others as well. And we have a thing called a religion. And therefore, at the center, at the beginning of Judaism, is the concept of a week. So don't tell me a week in Matan Torah don't go hand in hand. The concept of a week, and the core concept, there's one God in charge of all powers of nature. And that God judges us based on our behavior. And even in the contract we have belief in God and good behavior. Remember the first half and the second half? They don't have. No shows that thing. The round top for thanks to Michelangelo. So I want to show you today how it's not just in theory, I want to show you how Chumash teaches us that idea. Because the reader of Chumash finds out about Shabbat in chapter 1. When did the people of Israel find out about Shabbat? In Pshat. When does Am Yisrael, now, give me a proof. Who remembers a good proof that before we got the 10 Commandments, we knew about Shabbat? No, give me a proof in the text. What does it say in the 10 Commandments, the proofs that we knew about it already? Who remembers a good proof? What's the 10 Commandments say? Zachor et Yom HaShabbat, which means you can't remember something if you didn't know about it. So from a purely technical point of view, we knew about Shabbat. Now, according to Chazal, when's the first time the Jewish people found out about Shabbat? In Marah. Why? Because we came out of Egypt, we went 3 days in the desert, we shouldn't have gotten to Har Sinai, and we had trouble on the way. And instead of filling up, we get 3 days, the water is bitter. And then we have this really neat camp experience where all of a sudden the bitter water turns sweet. And God uses that as a training experience. Remember? What's it say there? It's called Enisayon. Sham Samlo Chok Mishpat Sham Yisrael. So Rashi tells us beautifully in Chazal, 3 things they learn. It's a machloket. There's 3 things. What 3 things? They argue. But according to everybody, Shabbat is one of them. Well, lots of different reasons why, but there's a very good reason why. Because in the next story, we're going to find out about Shabbat. Paradum is one of them, maybe Kibbutz Orei, maybe Didin, all different gears of. But Shabbat is before Matan Torah. But the main event, when we find out about Shabbat, the first I call camp experience, where we learn about Shabbat, is with the Matan. And that's going to be our first source. But before we open up the Chumash, I'm going to give you everything I learned from experience. If I give out a source sheet before share, no one pays attention. They have attention. You're checking ahead and trying to get the idea across. I need my sort of opening routine if you're catching up. I'm trying to get the key idea across in the beginning in case you fall asleep. So if you don't remember anything else, you already learned something. The first 5 minutes won't go away. Now, the idea of the number 7 is the first topic of Chumash, big topic, isn't it? What other cycles of 7 do we have other than the week? We have every week we have a cycle of 7. We have Shemitah every we have a cycle of 7 years and 7 cycles of 7, Shemitah and Yovel. And then every year what do we have? We have 7 weeks of counting during our grain harvest, okay? Which we call Strat Onda. So we have a weekly cycle, a yearly cycle of 7, and a multi-year cycle of 7. Okay? And basically, the law of Shemitah and Yovel is a law for a nation. Okay? How many nations have laws? You keep a holiday once every 50 years. That's unheard of, right? That's like once in the Yovel. You don't have that many celebrations where you're keeping track of something. Every 50-year celebration, the nation's keeping track, and it has a tremendous effect on our economy. The idea that no one owns land, the land goes back to its original ownership every 50 years, there's a reset of the whole economy. That affects the economy, not just in year 50, that affects the economy like the whole. That's a tremendous effect on our economy. You know, to make sure that what happened in Europe, in feudal Europe, that the landowners owned all the land, and either you were a lord or a serf. You couldn't get out of it. Now we have a thing where everyone, you can't get too rich, you can't get too poor. Now, back to, so we're going to talk about the first Shabbat experience, besides the story of creation, which is key. Remember, in creation, the whole idea of on day 3, what's God make? Not just land, but fertility. So let's see how it's Deshen, Esef, Mazriah Zera, it's real separate. That's reproduction as well as land and growth. It's fruit that has seeds, and produces more fruit. It's the beginning of life. Now, then we have the sun and the moon and the stars, and the sky, and that'll be the story. And then the Gan Eden story, how does Gan Eden do? Nothing's growing because there's no man, and there's no rain. Of course, Rashi thinks we don't need man, we just need rain. What's Rashi say? We need man to pray for rain. That Rashi is right on the spot, isn't it? I call it Sam Shuto Sholikras, Shuto Shotorah. It's like so deep that Rashi. You just take it for granted sometimes. Now, we're going to talk about the first Shabbat experience and how it relates to Shavuot, and explains why Shavuot is all about Matan Torah, not just about our grain harvest. One technical information that Chumash assumes the reader knows is that in the land of Israel, which the land we're supposed to be living in, according to Chumash, unless we misbehave, it's a land where you don't have grain all year long. There's only one season of grain. Like nowadays, there's like one baseball season, one football season, one. So fruit, in the supermarkets here, you have all year long pretty much, don't you? But before there was shipping and everything, there were seasonal fruits. Grain did not grow in Israel all year long, because it doesn't rain in the summer. There's only one season where you can harvest grain, and you need grain for bread. That season is from mid-April to mid-June. That has to do with climate in Israel. That's a given. Give or take a week or two, but it's called the beginning of the grain harvest. It's called Aviv in Hebrew, because the grain is like springing out for the ground. And by mid-June, whatever you harvested, and that's it. And that grain that you harvest during those 2 months or so has to last the whole year. And therefore, that grain harvest is life and death. Because if the grain harvest is bad, then people will be killing to get the supply. I had great-grandparents who were living in Israel, and there was like a really bad famine, and they went down to Egypt to get bread. He had family connections there. There's a whole book about that. They came, and why does Egypt have so much grain? There's the Nile. They have water all year long. They have sun all year long, and there's so much bread there that can stay overnight and get wet and dry. And they invented beer and fermentation. And therefore, what becomes a symbol of Egyptian culture? Chametz. Bread was such a big deal in Egypt. There was a minister in the government in charge of grain and baking. Remember him? He had that dream. Now, just as an aside, his dream, because the baker is a symbol of Egypt. Now, if you know wineries, what country is known for its wineries? Egypt or Israel? Israel, hands down, right? Because it's a hill country, like France. But the baker's dream, he's gone, and the butler, representing the Geffen, which is the symbol of Israel, is going to be Estem Rago. The symbol of Israel is going to be wine. So wine's going to go over. It's sort of forecasting. It's pretty smart, you'll say. To divination. Isn't he big on dreams? Now, let's get to the topic. Now, I have you all bring your Chumash, let's use it. Open up your Chumash to the story of the man, which is the first time the Jewish people find out about Shabbat. Now, remember, it was supposed to be a 3-day journey to get to Mount Sinai. Instead, it takes about 6 weeks because we're not ready yet to get the Torah. We're not there yet. God took us out of Egypt. We're not ready to make that commitment to be God's people. God has to do something to get us to buy into this courtship. So first he does that thing in Marah. Well, that's a big wow. Like compared to like camp, you have the opening day ceremony and cool things, and then you have the thing. After Marah, we traveled a little bit to Palm Springs. Remember that story? It's called Elim, but there's I think 12 springs and 70 palms, which is very significant. 70 nations, 12 tribes. You can do lots of kashot, but things are good there. That's the end of chapter 15. Right. And look how chapter 16 begins. Give me a page number.
It's 383.
And the stone is what page?
That is the
stone. Stone is 383. 383 and 3. Okay. So it starts in 383 or 384.
197 is one.
Also. So take a look. Basically, Perek Zion. You got to think about it. Shmot Perek Zion, the middle of Pashat Shalach. And we have a date. It's the 15th day of the second month. It's been a month since we left Egypt. We ran out of food. No more dough left over. No more dates left over from Elim. You see, we're out of food. And what do Jews do when there's no food? Even when there is food. Yeah, you know the joke. The waiter comes to the Jewish table. What question does he ask? Rabbi, anything okay? But God wants us to complain because He wants people to know where their food comes from. So we complain. How we complain is pretty bad. Remember, they complain with an attitude, like they're assuming we're on a death march, and we want to see God's glory. We want the people to appreciate how great God is before to get us ready to make the commitment of Hasina. And therefore, we're going to have this mana experience that God wants us to complain, and He wants to show the bread's coming from heaven. All we need is Pasuk Dalet. Okay, look at Pasuk Dalet. What's it say? Pasuk Dalet. Okay. I'm sorry. Lechem min hashamayim, but that bracha comes from here. Remember, Chazal, the beautiful drasha, the Torah was given to Ochlei Haman. The Torah was given to people who ate man, because The idea of lechem min hashamayim, how do people know that the source of bread is from heaven? Because it came down from heaven. What's the verb in Hebrew for any precipitation from heaven to earth? Matan. If it rains fire and brimstone, like when God destroyed stone, yeah, Hashem tira stone, Eish gofrit min hashamayim.
They use that shower for rockets falling down on them?
Lamtir, yeah.
They say that, rockets, they say shower?
More it's like, I mean, they use that word. I forget what they use for rockets nowadays. But anything from heaven to earth is called Matan. It can rain, like, it can rain cats and dogs. But anything from heaven to earth is called Matan. Does anything else connect heaven to earth? I mean, Shemayim V'Aretz seem like two separate areas, right? There's like a whole rakeh that divides them ever since day two. But the only thing that connects man, I'm sorry, I gave it away. The only thing that connects heaven and earth is from heaven to earth, the spring, and from earth to heaven is going to be tefillah. Amen. That's Rashi in a nutshell, isn't it? The two things in the introduction to God. Now, so let's read now. The people who go out and collect every their daily portion. Why? What's the purpose of the man experience? To test them, to train them. Not just a test, and nisayon is an experience that you live from. Will they follow my Torah or not? Have they received the Torah yet? We're about 3 weeks behind beforehand. We're in the middle of, we have the full moon of the second month. We're in the middle of the year. There's no food. We're going to have a camp experience relating to food. It's going to prepare them for Matan Torah. Will they follow a set of laws? Now, look at the next slide, which is really strange. What's it mean? Who heard Friday before? We just had that opening line, and right away we get right to Lechem Mishnah, correct? What I'm getting at is there something in the week that Friday seems to be more important than Shabbat. Before I mention Shabbat, what do I say? I talk about Yom Shishi. And what do we do on Yom Shishi? We take double. Lechem Mishnah, why? It's a special. We'll see why in a minute. But what I'm trying to point out is, as soon as I mention the manna, right away, right about Friday. Now, how do the people know what day of the week it is? When did Am Yisrael learn? How do they know what day of the month it is? Well, you have the moon. How do you know what time of the day it is? By the sun. Year by seasons. There's every nation. There's a natural calendar that has days, months, and years. Those are powers of nature. There's nothing natural about a week. Nothing happens every week in nature. In nature, something happens every day, every month, every year. Those are natural cycles that, of course, every calendar is based on. And every culture has them. The concept of a week, there's no logic to it. It's a big discussion who came up with the idea first. But we're one of the good. We're a pretty good candidate for the Chiddush. So we definitely first wanted to make a big deal about it, and it caught on like, whoa, went viral, didn't it? Idea of a week. No, but we're putting our own framework of time into our day-to-day life. We're setting a rhythm of 7, and it becomes that 7. All the holidays are 7 related, aren't they? For example, Chag HaMatzot is 7 days. Everyone knows that. Now, what's the classic reason people tell you why do we keep 7 days of Chag HaMatzot? Why 7 days? What's the classic reason why do we keep Shpisha Pesach? Because Kriyat Yam Suf. But it doesn't say that in Chumash. It's a nice midrash. But the law of keeping Chag HaMatzot for 7 days was given before we left Egypt. Back in Parshat HaChodesh. Then we have 7 weeks, Shavuot. And then we have Chag HaSukkot in the 7th month for how many days? 7 days. But there's something special about 7 in holidays. There's no doubt about it. We'll try to explain why. Now, this is setting up the stage. Let me give you a little hint, because you might talk about it in Kiddush on Friday night, tomorrow night. when you invite the Shabbos queen to the table, don't we invite her every Friday night? So yeah, but when she comes, we make a toast, don't we? How do you make a toast to someone? You take a cup of wine or champagne, and you praise your guests, don't you? How important they are. Now, how do we praise the Sabbath day? First, you make a birthday agafen, and we give 3 praises about how awesome Shabbos is. What's so awesome about Shabbat? No. What's our praise of Shabbat? What's so special about Shabbat? Who remembers? It's Zecher L'Maseh Bereshit. Don't we say that? First, we thank our host we thank God for inviting, for sponsoring, our guest, for Shabbat, the Queen. There's a whole song about it. But we say Zecher L'Maseh Bereshit, don't we? Yeah, it's Zecher L'Yitzat Mitzrayim. That's based on the 10 Commandments in Shemot in the Garden. But what do we say in between? Between Zecher L'Maseh Bereshit and Zecher L'Yitzat Mitzrayim, we mumble something. What's that coming from? Everyone says that, right? You know by heart. You know what you're referring to? It's got to be something in Chumash, because we have to say for Shemot. Yeah, in Parshat Emor. Before we get to Moadei Hashem, we have Moadei Hashem, we'll see it soon. And before we get to the actual Moadim, we mentioned Shabbat, because Shabbat overrides Yom Tov. Because in Yom Tov you can cook, Shabbos you can't cook. What happens when they collide? Is Yom Tov so important that you can cook on Yom Tov, because even if it's Shabbos, or the Shabbos overrides? So what's more important? Shabbos, I would think Yom Tov is more important. What's Chumash telling you? That Shabbos is more important, and that's the Ramban of why the Moadim begin with Shabbat. We'll give an additional reason, but when you say Ki Yom Tchilah L'Bikar Kodesh, we're saying Shabbat. I can't say the word Trump, but Shabbat trumps Yom Tov in the old sense of the word. Shabbat is more important than Yom Tov. Got the idea? No. So I'm just showing you how central Shabbat is to all the holidays. Now let's get back to work. How does the Mana experience prepare you for Matan Torah? So, in the Shulchan Aruch of Mana, how many commandments are there with Mana? But there's a Shulchan Aruch that comes with Mana. If I'm writing a guidebook, to the people about Mana,
Go out.
You can't take
it doesn't fall in your backyard. You have to go out and collect it.
You have to not take more than your portion.
Can't take for overnight.
You take as much as you need, and therefore, what can't you do?
Overtake.
You can't take more than you need, or maybe you can't hoard.
Or say,
That's now. Why would someone want to hoard?
because they don't know about the next day.
They don't
So if I have real emunah in God, I won't hoard because I know God will provide for me tomorrow. That's a classic Ben Adam Lamakom reason. I think there's a more basic Ben Adam Chavero reason. Because you're talking about a nation starving, humanitarian aid comes from heaven. What would happen with normal people? With everyone starving and food comes from heaven or from anywhere? What will happen? Look at the news. Okay? Everyone's going to hoard and the people will kill for it, won't they? Because who knows what it'll be tomorrow? Because you want to store, don't you? It's human nature. To be able to take as much as you need and share and care about other people as well. If you're training to be a nation representing God, the idea of taking as much as you need is as much as you want. Not to be in Kiddush but when you take what you need and not you don't take more than you need. Now, how much do you need? Ask your local self how much you need. But taking as much as you need is a big challenge, but it relates to Benam Chavero as well, between man and his fellow. It's building a society where people care about other people as well. And therefore, it's not only preparing us to have trust in God and belief in God, it's also training us to be a nation that behaves properly. I want to prove that as we go on. Now, why can you take double on Friday? If you're only supposed to take as much as you need, why is it okay to take double on Friday? Because taking double on Friday is as much as you need. Now, listen to the logic. Remember to go to SAT tests? No, this is to that, like that is to that. Or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
Analogies. Listen. Okay? In theory, you should take as much as you need every day. Sometimes you have to take more than you need. Why? Because you won't have tomorrow. Got that? And therefore, how does Shabbat train us that it's okay to hoard? Because I can take double on Friday, because taking double sometimes is as much as you need. So sometimes you have to hoard, but when you have to hoard, how much do you hoard? As much as you need. Now, the Shabbos test is easy. That's a beginner's test. Now, how did Chumash teach us? How does God teach Am Yisrael at the simplest level? What happened on a daily basis if you took too much? Yeah, and what did you learn? It doesn't pay. It always has more garbage in the house. That's all. There you go. What happened if you went out to collect on Shabbat? You didn't find. So it's like it's a real simple test where you learn the easy way. It's because it doesn't pay. It's a real beginner's training.
It's foolproof.
Yeah. Now take that analogy to the grain harvest in the land of Israel. If grain grew 20 all year long, so you take every day as much as you need. In the land of Israel, during grain harvest, I have to take more than I need for that day. Why? Because during my grain harvest, I have 2 months to collect a whole year's supply. And who knows what's going to be the next year? During my grain harvest, I have to hoard. I have no choice but to hoard. And therefore, what are people going to do during grain harvest? They're going to hoard, and boy, they're going to hoard. And who are they going to focus on? On themselves and their family. The problem is, not everyone owns land. Not everyone is successful. There's strangers. There's Levites who are stuck in education and don't know land. There's Amlonot and Itamim. There's a whole book about them called Chumash. And what do we need to do during our grain harvest? Okay. Even though it's okay to hoard, and you have to hoard, okay, what do I need to do? I need to remember Naomi and Ruth. There's all Megillah about it, isn't there? It's called Lechet Shechat and Peh. During my grain harvest, I'll always have to be considerate, even though I have to hoard. At the same time, I need to remember other people. Now that's easy. Planning how much to allocate is easy when it comes to Shabbat and Friday and Shabbat. When it comes to a whole season, it's much more difficult. And therefore, I have a heter to hoard. I need to hoard. But at the same time, I need to have to balance that. In fact, and does Chumash give you how much you have to allocate? How much pay you have to leave over? And how much leket you have to leave over?
How much is a corner?
Yeah. Well, someone showed this morning when they were blessing that Torah study in the morning, they mumbled some Mishnah. First one, payah. Why? You can't quantify tzedakah. Follow? It's a tzedakah giving is a way of life, and therefore, when you're harvesting your field, at every stage of the harvest process, you're thinking of others. It's called leket when you're beginning. We'll say, well, I forgot what it's called. Yeah, shikhacha. You get also, you have to remember to put that over as well. It's another stage. Then pay up. At every stage, you're always thinking other people exist. It's training you. It's a way of life already. It's a way of thinking. Now let's go back to our. So what I'm trying to explain to you is that the Man experience is going to prepare us for the land of Israel, where at the one hand I need to take care of myself, at the same time I have to take care of others, and therefore the whole Shabbat experience is beginning and training of Beinam Chaver as well. And the word Chumash uses to teach everything I just told you is another 3-letter word that you know by heart called Omer. Ayin Mem Resh. We're talking about it for the last 47 days. Correct? But for some reason we're counting weeks, not just days. Now I'm sure you realize that we begin counting Omer, not only according to Chumash, you begin counting the Omer at the beginning of your grain harvest. That's it. But at the beginning of the week of your grain harvest, got it? And then, when do we finish counting the Omer? When the grain harvest is over. It's about 2 months, but we make sure it's 7 weeks. Chumash is on to something good. But our grain harvest in Omer, every day of a grain harvest, we talk about Omer. We make a big deal about it. But the word Omer is almost impossible to translate because it almost never comes up in Chumash. Ask Google; they'll give you 7 or maybe 3 or 4 different possibilities what Omer means. Because look in verse 16 in chapter 16. Tetzayin. That's the first time you have the word Omer in Chumash. What's it say? Zeh davar asher tzivah Hashem. Diktu mimeno. What's it say? Ish lefi ochlo. Omer lagogolim. Now, in the meantime, you can give up the pages now. Now you won't cheat anymore because I'll go faster than the source sheet. But you don't need the source sheet yet, but everything we did so now is on there. But now we need to help, we'll save some time. But while we're giving the source sheet out, I want you to look into the English translation. If someone has a phone, you can check your messages now also and look at the English translation on your phone. And I want to see different ones. Look in your art scroll. How do they translate over in verse 16? They translated OMBR. Why did they do that? Because we don't know what it means. It's a strange word. So what's it say there? Zel davar shetzivah Hashem. The buzzword is like it. That gets sort of clean a little bit, as opposed to the soft store. Ish lefi ochlo. That's as much as you need. How much per person? Omer lagogol. An omer per person. The numbers of your the people in your household. Then what's it say in Pasuk Yefet? Now I want to suggest something. It's not critical for this year, but I want to suggest what the word Omer actually might mean. Referring to. It's a special word for it's used just by the mom. And one other time I say 2 other times. At the very end of chapter 16, there's a footnote. Look in Pasuk Vav in verse 36, the last line of the chapter. Because Chumash is assuming that the reader has no idea what an Omer is. There's like an endnote. There's a word in Chumash, but Chumash has endnotes often. What's it say? So the Omer is now. How come I'm saying endnotes? There's another endnote right beforehand. That what was Aaron commanded to? What did Moshe command Aaron to do? To take an Omer of man, put it into a closed container. It's in Senate, and put it next to the symbol of our covenant with God, called the Aron Abri, in front of God. In other words, that's already telling you that Omer and Har Sinai are connected. You can't miss that. Because the Omer of Man was in the Aron Kodesh, in the mesh opening up the Aron Kodesh and finding a can of tuna next to the Sefer Torah. What's going on? But there's a container of Man, a daily portion of Man. Remember, tuna comes in like a daily portion. Not for you go camping, you do it very well. So the word Omer is unique. Now, what I want to claim is it says an Omer is a tenth of an ephah. Now, all through Chumash, over 100 times, a tenth of an ephah is called an isaron. Chumash has a metric system. The classic dry measure in the Bible is called an ephah. That's everywhere. An ephah is the ancient dry measure, like a bushel. And a tenth of an ephah is called an isaron. And that's about as much food as a person needs a day. You can argue exactly what the share is, but the word for tenth of an ephah is always an isaron. So an omer can't just mean a measure. It's never used as a measure. The word isaron is used for the measure. I think omer is the name of the utensil that they use to collect the manna. Because if I'm collecting the manna outside the camp, and I need to collect in the morning for the whole day because I read somewhere that by late morning it melted. Is there a source for that? It says so, doesn't it? So I had to collect in the morning for the entire day, which means I need the utensil to collect it. Therefore, it makes no sense to me that the word omer is the name of the utensil that the people use to collect the manna with. And how much did you put into that utensil? As much as you need. What was the maximum anyone could eat in a day? No, a strong 18-year-old boy would need a whole tenth of an ephah. But most people put in less. But the container, like we have a cup. So a cup could be a measure, like baking a cake. A cup of flour is like 8 ounces or something like that. But if you're going to Starbucks and buying coffee, a cup is the name of the utensil, and they'll ask you how much you want to put in. Got the idea? So sometimes a word could be the utensil or the measure. I'm saying this omer container that everyone has, if you know the army, it's called a mess thing, like a little thing everyone has in the camp. And you collected all your food into that every day, you put into as much as you need. Now, what's important though, is the word omer and mana go hand in hand. And the test again is taking as much as you need. And learning sort of the hard way if you would. Now, the word omer again is special here in the laws of the mana, our first Shabbat experience. Now, what was the first Shabbat the Jewish people kept? So what day did the mana start falling? We ran out of food on the 15th, and God said, tomorrow morning, you'll seek for Hashem. Which means the first day of the mana was the 16th. So the first Sunday in Jewish history was going to be the 16th. It's a good day to start counting here. Yeah. I mean, it's a month earlier, but the 16th is the first day that mana fell. It's the first Sunday. And therefore, what was the first Shabbat in Jewish history? It's the 16th, the first Sunday. The joke with high school, with yeshiva kids is the first Sunday was a Monday. You understand that? The way to remember it. The mana started falling on the 16th. The first Good Friday was the 21st. The 22nd was the first Shabbat. Did everyone keep that Shabbat?
No,
According to the Bible, they didn't.
right, some people.
Some people went out to collect. They didn't find anything. Other people tattletale already on Friday. Remember? Hey, what day? And they said tomorrow Shabbos. It's all camp experience and training on that Shabbat. By the next week, I'm assuming they kept. So that's the 29th, isn't it? So the 29th they kept. The next Shabbos was the 36th of Iyar. Oh, there's no 36th of Iyar. What was the next Shabbat? Well, it depends whether
Was first.
Yeah, that's the Torah was good.
whether the 6th or the 7th, which is exactly the machloket. The Torah was given, everyone holds the Torah was given on Shabbat. We took Gemara about it.
Right.
The argument was Iyar a full month or a ceremony? Was it 29 days in Iyar or 30 days in Iyar? And therefore, the Torah was, the second Shabbat, Amisor was either the 6th or the 7th, which is machloket when the Torah was given. And we kept 2 Shabbatot in a row, and we got the Torah. Because the mana experience was training us that was discipline for Matan Torah. So don't tell me that mana and omer, don't tell me that the word omer and Matan Torah aren't connected. In Shabbat, for sure. Now, where's the next time we have omer and Chumash? Parshat Emor. And that's cute, Emor with an aleph. But in Parshat Emor, chapter 23, take a look.
Sorry, how did you get to only 2 Shabbats and then you got to Torah?
Because the first Shabbat we didn't keep.
Sorry, get out of trying or.
We run out of food on the 15th of the year.
That's one. So
Yeah.
you're starting there.
So it started on the 16th. Now, we know that Shabbos Hagadol was the 10th. And we left Egypt Thursday night. But that's working backwards from the 16th to Sunday. You understand? Everyone works backward. So the 16th is the first Sunday. The first Shabbos is 22nd, we don't keep. The first Shabbos we do keep is the 29th. The next Shabbos is 36th, which is either the 6th or 7th of year of Sivan. Got it?
So you're
Which is
talking
the
about
we got Torah.
Shabbat with man.
What?
You're talking about Shabbat with man or Shabbat in general?
Shabbat in general. That's the first. There is no Shabbat before the mana. The mana and Shabbat go hand in hand.
No Shabbat in the Torah.
And Midrash there is, but not Shabbat. It's a machloket in Midrashim, because if we learn about Shabbat in Mara, then we didn't have a Shabbat beforehand. Even if we did have Shabbat, we couldn't keep it because we were slaves. What? Maybe Sheba Levi did, because they learned Nista.
Right.
You know why they learned Nista? Because Nikla was a Nikla here. Now, anyone ever been to Tzfat? So in Tzfat, there's Yeshiva Shem Be'evet. You ever seen it? Up on the mountain, there's Yeshiva Shem Be'evet. Oh, we have you get part in the other room? Yes. Anyways, that's how it was. What happened? I was making a joke about Tzfat. Oh, we've been to Tzfat, probably, yeah? Yeshiva Shem is up on the hill, near the Mitsudah. So that's where Yaakov studied, remember? That was the yeshiva. Now, well, why is Yeshiva Shem Be'evet in Tzfat? So in the yeshiva world, you either learn Nigla or Nista, right? Now, what in Yeshiva Shem Be'evet, what were they learning? Nigla or Nista? It can't be Nigla because it wasn't Nigla yet. So in Yeshiva Shem Be'evet, learning Nista. If you're learning Nista, where's the best place to learn Nista? In Tzfat. that's nice for, that's just sort of joking, but something hidden there. Now, back to, which that's the Shabbaton spot. Now I got off track. That's it. Parshat Emor now. Is the next time in Chumash we find the word Omer, out of nowhere. What happens? Pasuk Tet, Perach Gimel Pasuk Tet, down the page for me, it's on your source sheet. It's Roman number 2. Oh, but I should prove that remember in going back in Pasuk Gimel Tet, it's on the source sheet. God tells Mordechai Aaron, take it since 7th of Man, to take Shama Melov Omer Man. Now, if an Omer is a measure, Melov Omer doesn't make sense. But if Melov is the container, then fill the container to the top. So that's my support that the Omer is the utensil, but filling it to the top is Melov Omer. Now, back to, again, we've got a keeping teaspoon kind of thing. Now, back to Perach Gimel. God tells Moshe, "Daber b'nei Yisrael b'Matan, ki tova ha'aretz asher nitan lechem b'shatem ekzira." When you come to land and you begin your grain harvest, get in the spring. V'veitem et Omer shik sechem al kohen. Now, I want to hear the different translations now for Omer. No, what's your English say for Omer now? In verse 10. But it got a capital O in it. Now it's the proper now. Other translations will say sheaf. Sheaf, S-H-E-F. In Hebrew, shibolet. Now, Omer, we know it's from barley because it's the first grain that's ready. Our barley comes out before wheat. But Omer doesn't mean barley, shibolet is barley. I mean, shibolet is sheaf. And Sorah is barley. But why is Chumash using the same word it used for the utensil to collect the man? We're using that word to describe the beginning of our grain harvest. Why? Because what statement are we making? We're going to treat our grain harvest as though it's lechem min hashamayim. But we're going to say lechem min haaretz because we do it ourselves. Because when we start collecting our grain, which is going to be our staple for the whole year, what do we talk about for every day of our grain harvest? Omer. Now, if you didn't pay attention, it's just some strange word. But if the word Omer is mentioned first in Chumash, uniquely by the Mana experience, it's a special word by the Mana experience. What's Chumash doing? It's called Gzera Shalom. That I'm using that word to tie my grain harvest in the land of Israel to the Mana experience in the desert. And therefore, what do we need to do during our grain harvest? Number one, we need to remember that even though we're doing all the work, we're going to treat our grain harvest like it's lechem min hashamayim. And thank you for our grain harvest. Even though we do all the work, we give God the credit. But how do we say thank you to God? By acting thank you. And therefore, what's the whole purpose of talking about Omer for those 7 weeks? And how come we're counting weeks? Why weeks? Because weeks and Omer go hand in hand. And that training experience of hoarding as much as you need from Friday to Shabbos, take that analogy to the whole year. Now, what's my proof? In Pasuk Tetvav, it says, we read the Omer, we do this whole little ceremony at the beginning of our harvest, and then we count. We start them from Mekrat Shabbat, Sheva Shabtot. But why are we starting with Mekrat Shabbat? Why is the word Shabbat so central? You can argue with this speaking what Chumash leaves it up to Chazal. There's no way to know for sure. But Chazal beautifully, based on Sukkot Yeshua, related to Pesach because it's in the Moadim. That's a whole good reason why Chazal's expression is much better. But the main thing is, our grain harvest and Shabbat go hand in hand. Because first of all, the message that we treat our grain harvest like it's from God. And why 7? Why Shabbat and grain harvest? To remind us of what thing? Ever since chapter 1 of Bereshit, that all the powers of nature, I want to remember during my grain harvest, it's coming from God. This makes perfect sense. And of course, I'll talk about in coming weeks. Because I need to remember that God's the source of that. And if I want to make sure my grain harvest is going to be successful, I don't turn to Baal and Asherah. Who do I turn to? And what's Hashem tell me? You want your grain harvest to be successful? What do you need to do? Share with others. What's my proof? It's not a drasha, it's a pasuk. Look in Pasuk of Aleph now. Yeah, look at Pasuk of Aleph where I summarize Shavuot. After 7 weeks, you bring stale Menachem, we take our first week. and bring the first week korban in the mikdash for the new week. And the Korban Betzim Yazim for Chodesh Shalachem, Hukat Ulon Dortechem Mahomosh Botechem. See that?
No.
Shavuot is over in Pasach Havav, isn't it? And then we copy paste a pasuk from Kasher Kushim. Pasach Habet, verse 22. When you're harvesting your field, that's the Ten Commandments, isn't it? And what's it saying? During your grain harvest, why am I counting the omer and counting weeks? To remember when I'm collecting my grain, remember that it's not a little, it's the whole goal of this whole section from Pasuk Tet to Chabet is to get the Pasuk Chabet. Because I'm counting the omer to remember to do Pasuk Chabet because I have to hoard and I have to remember other people exist. Which was the first message of Shabbat in the first place. A Friday, there's somebody made a big deal about Lechem Mishnah right away Friday. Taking Lechem Mishnah on Friday because Shabbat won't fall. It's like real simple training to teach an idea for us. So that explains why Omer and Shabbat go hand and why we're counting weeks. And why at the same time, of course, it's an agricultural holiday, but it's not just coinciding with this Matan Torah. It's the essence of Matan Torah, because it's the underlying message of Matan Torah that all the powers of nature is one God, and God's picking a nation to be His model nation of taking that idea that those powers of nature are a function of building a just society. And the best example of a just society is what we do with our excess. It's a little socialistic. It's capitalistic. You need to create capital. But then how you allocate that capital, that's the challenge of being Jewish. It's a beautiful balance between capitalism and socialism. You need to build capital, but you need education, not legislation, but education, how to allocate.
I would also add that the way of allocating is split because it's split between, I would say, almost like preserving their dignity with payah. They do the work, just like Hashem, you're doing the work, but also you're not harvesting it for them. They have to go out.
You have to give them a little dignity and let them do it on their own.
And then there's another concept of tzedakah, which is the bread that I do physically have, I give.
Give more than 10%.
But less than 10%.
Give It's there's mitzvot all the time to remind you of those things. Shabbat. Now, it's not by chance you have Lechem Mishnah on Shabbat. That's how you do Shabbat. Now, I want to bring one last proof that Omer has a lot to do with caring for others. And you can't forget this, because there's a mitzvah in Chumash to forget. Who remembers where that is? There's a mitzvah to forget, isn't there? It's my favorite mitzvah. A machmer. It's called shichacha. Shichacha is to forget. There's a mitzvah called forgetting. You forgot.
It's not called.
I'm joking. Shich, you've heard of shichacha? Yeah, exactly.
So you purposely.
Rabbi, that's like saying there's a mitzvah to get divorced. I mean, come on.
No. There's a mitzvah that didn't say you should say this. Should you, if it happens?
If it happens, you do the same thing. If you have to.
So let's read. Perek Chavdal, it's on the source sheet. It's Roman numeral 3. It's big letters. Ki tiksor sicha b'sadecha, v'shachach gomer b'sadeh. It didn't say, should you forget? It says, when you're harvesting, forget. It's written. And Pshat is, if you forget. I'm saying, when you read it carefully, it sounds like you're supposed to forget. I think that's really what it means. When you're harvesting your field, you should forget, I think. That's a bit, maybe a bit of a drasha.
No, it is a Joshua. It's similar to the Joshua that we talked about, like on Bagan Eden, that it was like inevitable that they were going to sin, right? Because
It's
in
not that, yeah.
can be if and
It can be when, yeah.
and it can be when. So,
It is based on the context, but let's say you do here. When, ki can be when or if.
right, same thing.
Same thing with in case of that. Now, in case of that, the Shrekha said that. Don't go back and pick it up. Leave it for who? The Gary Yatomanamana. So the God will bless you. Now, what's that mean? In other words, why am I calling out? How do they translate Omer now in English? In your English, look in 24, set 19. Some English translations say what? A bundle. Some will say sheep. GPS says sheep. Our school says bundle. because they follow Chazal, especially the left. The Omer is a leket is when you're making the bundles, and Shikha is when you get a whole bundle and you're bringing on back into the threshing floor. At each stage of, but we don't use the word Omer for bundle, and now Aluma is a bundle. And that's what I said that. The word Omer is never used until we get root. Is what she collecting. Omerim. Again, all those things can be by chance. But Chumash is using that word. It's Chumash, and it rarely comes up in Chumash again. In Tidlins, the hungry people are waving are happy about the omen. Like they're filling this and stuff. By the way, in Hebrew, if you rarely leave someone alive and give them minimal food to stay alive, that's litamer. That's what he felt. Got that? It's forward now. So I had the source from Miguel Ruth about, but she says like asafti b'morim. That's growth like alakta leket v'asafti b'morim. For Ruth, leket is like less of. Leket means to glean a little bit. And we're like do dvarim b'yomo. But for her, it's asifa. It's like taking a lot. Now, everything I just told you is basically Moshe Rabbeinu explains in Sefer Dvarim and Parshat Eke, just really quickly. So you're supposed to remember your desert experience. Moshe is speaking the 40th year to remember what they lived in the desert. He says in 40 years, the man Amutchala Nasotam, Roman number 4 in the top. The desert experience was to train you for the dangers of prosperity in the land of Israel. Okay? In the desert, there's no fear of getting wealthy. Why? Because you can't make a living, you're a cola. Someone's providing for you.
I thought there's nowhere to spend it.
There's nowhere to make it. There's nowhere to make capital because there's no harvest. God provides you. Now, what's Chumash saying? What's Moshe saying? Why did God put you to the desert experience? Because you're about to go to Israel, a land that's what? Okay, because God brings Eretz Tovah, Eretz Kitah, Torah, etc., the whole thing. And then what's the danger? All things we pray for. We might get too wealthy and too prosperous, which is fine, but what's the danger? In your wealth and prosperity, it'll lead to affluence and haughtiness. You forget God. And therefore, why did God push you to the desert experience? Remember that you shouldn't say Kol Kibbutz Yadi, but rather that God gave you the ability to become wealthy. You understand? Now, God didn't say therefore be poor. It says be wealthy. But use that wealth to be a partner with God and allocate that. And basically, God's going to say, if you want blessing in your crops, share that with others, and that will bring the blessing. So I'm going to end with, I know we're out of time. So I want to show you two things. One is skip to Roman numeral 6. We have Shemitah and Sefer Dvarim. So every 7 years we do Shemitah. We call that Shemitah Ksafim. But listen to Pasuk David. It says, Efes Kiloi B'Chev Yom. On the source sheet, in your Chumash in chapter 15, right before the holidays in chapter 16, there shouldn't be an Evyom. Why? Because God will bless you. On what condition? Rakim Shema Tishma. God's saying there won't be Evyomim if you keep laws of Mitzvot. Now it sounds like keep Tefillah, Shabbos, etc. And everyone will be wealthy. No, saying what? It's your job to make sure there's no Evyomim, because there'll always be Evyomim. Because what's it say next to the pasuk side? Shouldn't be a poor person. And what? And you have to work. Don't hold back your hand. Right? Don't hold back your heart in your hand. Instead, what? Open your hand to them. And then it says, Shemitah comes up. I have more reason to hoard. Why? I don't have to hoard for 1 year, I have to hoard for 2 years. And for sure, what you do, you won't be able to give tzedakah because you have to care for yourself. And therefore, it says, don't let Shemitah cause you to hold back your hand. That's what it says. That's called davar. It says, "Hishamer lecha pasuk that. Pidya davar l'bacham dal lemor kavashat hashmita. Rabbi Menachem v'chichavion v'lo tideno." And he'll call out to you, and God will hear his prayer. Therefore, no ton tideno v'yirabbe nechwai ki bilal davar zash kibar Hashem l'kecha. Got that? If you take care of the poor, God will make sure you'll have enough. That's an emunah. That's a munah. You follow? If I'm giving tzedakah, God will bring the blessing. If I take care of the poor, then God will bless me with the ability to help the poor. Now listen to the last line. Ki lo yechdel yom mikerav haaretz. What's that mean? You're always going to be poor people. And therefore, God's commanding you to what? And therefore, Efes Kibbatvan is a commandment, in my opinion. But it's our job to make sure there's always going to be Evyonim. But Evyonim is a state frame of mind. But if you take care of him, you won't be an Evyon. Financially, he's an Evyon. But in life, you won't be an Evyon because you took care of him. It's your job to take care of that. And if that's your way of life, then God will give you enough and you'll prosper. But that idea, it's so basic to Chumash. That's not praying to God to make me wealthy. It's praying to remember how I need to behave to be deserving of God's blessings. It's a whole different, that's the difference between Avodah Zorah and that's why it's such a key thing with Chumash from beginning to end. Now, what I want to end with is, first of all, if you look at the holidays, all the agricultural holidays in Chumash, which are the Shosh Regalim, all relate to worrying what's going to be the outcome of my harvest. Before the grain harvest begins, I'm worried stiff. There's nothing to be happy about yet because I'm worried stiff what's going to be with the grain harvest. And therefore, I have what's called Chag HaMatzot Ba'aviv. And I'm worried and I have to remember, if I want my grain harvest to be good, I need to share my grain harvest with others. Shavuot, I thank God for my grain, and I'm worried about my fruit harvest coming in. Because that's bad, that would be bad also. Comes to Sukkot, I thank God for my fruit harvest. I'm worried about next year's rain, because everything depends on next year's rain, all the high holidays. So I have Hallel and Hoshana. Got it? So in all the holidays, I'm worrying about the upcoming season. That's our four Rosh Hashanah. I'll only done 4 times a year. The Gemara talks about. But I need to remember not to pray for a good harvest. I need to remember that God's in charge of the harvest, that He'll bless me based on the society that I built. That's so fundamental to Jewish, to Chumash ever since. That's the essence of Matan Torah. And that's why the week, the rhythm that we put into our lives is the theme of Shabbat. It's a rhythm every day, every year, every Shemitah. Now, there is a law. I'll add 2 things that are cute, sort of. That's my Matan Torah thing. Chag HaMatzot, I remember God orchestrated our national history, our freedom from Egypt, to coincide with the spring. That's clear, isn't it? God orchestrates the Exodus that He wants us to relate our freedom to the beginning of our grain harvest. That's Mufresh knowledge. But even though I need, once a year I make a big celebration about remembering, I was a slave in Egypt and God took me out. I need to remember it every day because that memory shapes my behavior. Just read Chumash. Remember you were a slave in Egypt, and therefore treat others nicely, you don't mistreat others. Take your suffering and don't do that to others. But then remember you were a stranger, you didn't mistreat you, don't do that to others. It's a mega thing through Chumash. So it's a once a year celebration that affects my day-to-day behavior the whole year. When it comes to Shavuot, it's the exact opposite. Chumash is Mufresh in Parshat Elchanan that I have to remember Matan Torah every day of my life. Like that's Mufresh in Perek Daled in Parshat Ekev. You can look it up later on. Now, no, it's Matan Torah I can't forget every day of my life. And now the rabbis make up a law once a year to make a big deal about it. So we're working backwards. So it's a daily celebration to make sure once a year, because then Chumash is big on once a year for Mitzrayim, but then I remember that every day. Like use the Mother's Day example. Because once a year is Mother's Day, you make sure every day is Mother's Day. And the flip side, every day you can't forget Matan Torah, because every day is Matan Torah Day, but I need once a year to make a big deal about it. So it's like working now. There is one law to remember Mamad Har Sinai, because every 7 years we relive Mamad Har Sinai, it's called Hakel. That's for sure. Hakel, Mamad Har Sinai go hand in hand, you can see the proof. The same words, Yom HaKahal, it's easy to prove, Hashem. We do the same thing at Hakel like we did. It was every 7 years we relive Mamad Har Sinai. But why every 7 years? Because Hakel is at the end of the Shemitah cycle. That's going to be source 5. Okay. By Moshe, at more in Perek Al and learning, Vacation Taseh Shemitah. I mean, Vacation Shemitah Hakel Sukkot. Then everyone gathers together. Hakel Ta'am, the Manishmul, the Manimudu, the Rat Hashem. It's copy paste from Mamad Har Sinai. Now, to relive Mamad Har Sinai, I should go to Har Sinai to relive it and teach the Torah. And what do we do at Hakel? We read the Torah out loud. We got it. But what we do at Hakel, we should go to Har Sinai. But the weeks or the months prior to Matan Har Sinai, we should be eating manna. How are we gonna pull that off? So I don't need to go to the desert for Matan Torah, for Har Sinai, because Har Sinai, we never left, we took it with us in the Mishkan. Remember, the Mishkan is a portable Har Sinai, and the Mishkan becomes a permanent temple in Menachem Shir Hashem. So where did we gather for Hakel? At Har Sinai, which is now Beit HaMikdash. During the Shemitah year, who does the land belong to? No, the land belongs to the owner. Also, who does the produce belong to? It doesn't belong to God, it belongs to everybody. The produce of the land brings to everybody. The trees don't know it's a Shemitah year. They give their fruit. But you can't gather, you can't do asifa, but what can you do? You can take as much as you need. What's the law during Shemitah? You're allowed to take enough food for a day at a time. Any halacha on Shemitah. During Shemitah, everything's hefker, but a limited hefker. It's hefker for a day at a time. You can take as much food for a day at a time. What do the laws of Shemitah basically create? During the summer of the Shemitah year, right before Hakel, for several months, there's food everywhere in the land. Everywhere you turn, there's food, isn't there? The trees don't know it's a Shemitah year. They give their fruit. There's fruit everywhere, and how much can everyone take? Even the owner, only enough food for a day at a time. That's what laws of Shemitah do. What does Shemitah create? It creates a manna experience in the land of Israel. And by the way, it's called, in Parshat Bahar, it's called Shabbat Haaretz, remember? Because Shabbat and Shemitah, it's the same basic idea. So what I'm claiming is that the laws of Shemitah are preparation every 7 years to receive the Torah again. So now, give me a proof, or at least a remez, that there must be some deep connection between Shemitah and Har Sinai. Which was last week's parsha, wasn't it? It always comes out before Shavuot. Isn't that perfect? In other words, why are we mentioning Har Sinai in the introduction of Lashon Shemitah? Because that's exactly what Shemitah is. It's preparation. It's the essence of Har Sinai. So if we go back to my title, where's that title? What's Shavuot? We're celebrating the concept of a week. But the concept of a week has everything to do with what we do with our grain harvest. We don't say thank you, we act thank you. It's a blessing. But that understanding leads to a nation who's representing God, building a society that at the core of its national behavior, God, we're always caring for less fortunate people. We need to generate capital, build capital, but how we allocate it is going to be what's important. And that's why the concept of a week is preparation for Matan Torah. It's our, if you remember Shabbat and Parshat Kitisa, what Shabbat really the Ten Commandments? Because it's our weekly reminder of Brit Sinai. Remember in Parshat Kitisa, it says Shabbat is our weekly reminder that we're a Mamlechet Kohanim Kadosh. Our weekly reminder of Brit Sinai is Shabbat. Remember the Shita of Shabbat Tishmaro. It's all just like the Mishkan is a reminder of our covenant with God in the realm of space. Shabbat in the realm of time is our weekly reminder of our commitment to be God's people. God separated us to be His model nation, and the way we serve God is by half the society that we build, showing people that what brings blessing is not serving multiple gods and doing, feeding animals to God and things like that. It's rather, now I need to pray and bring sacrifices to remember that thing. It's not which God to pray to. It's the God who will bless you if you become a partner with God in creation. Because the way that God opens His hand, we say Mashra, we're describing God, but that's what we need to do. God does it by giving us that ability to do that. So that way, coming owner, the thing, it's a core theme of Chumash ever since day one. And therefore, Shavuot, don't tell me that Shavuot doesn't relate to that Matan Torah doesn't relate to the 7 weeks, the concept of a week, the concept of our grain harvest, the grain harvest, the Matan Torah go hand in hand. He's had ever since day one. And it's a good name for the holiday, for Shavuot. Because they tell you when they go to college in academia, they say it's got nothing, the rabbis made it up, right? If you ever learn that, they say, oh, the rabbis, there's an agricultural holiday in Polish, and the rabbis make up this Matan Torah stuff. So they're missing, again, and God orchestrated Matan Torah to coincide with the Katzir. Just like he orchestrated Set Mitzrayim to come out with the spring. That's why Leibtag. There's another thing, the Korban Shlamim, which is unique to Shavuot. The only time the Tzibur brings the Shlamim is on Shavuot with the Leibtag. Now, the only person for Shlamim that Har Sinai, the Tzibur brought Shlamim. And then Yom HaShmini, when the Chod Hashem returns. So if there's one holiday when the Tzibur brings the Shlamim, it's got to be Matan Torah related. Because Matan Torah is the only time we have a Korban Tzibur where Am Yisrael brings the Shlamim. But that's another. But there's so many remazim when you study. Not when you read Chumash, when you study Chumash. But Chumash wants you to find things. It's a book to study, not just read. So that search for Matan Torah behind Shavuot. The concept of the week is basically Chumash going out its way to call the holiday weeks and counting down the weeks, and relating those weeks to Matan Torah and the whole word Omer to play that game. You know, to teach to type. Chumash uses the word Omer in 3 different places, so you tie them together. And when you tie them together, they don't like all mosaic. You understand my point?
Right.
Anyway, thank you so much. You have a quick question?
Yeah, so the way you started off, I would say it was almost scary, because you started off with, I would say that you put this up with more of a little thing, so it sounded like you went anti a little bit, the way you said that the relationship is conditional. God is saying that you do these things that I will do, and then by the end, you're saying these things that God is making conditional. The relationship is not so much a selfish prayer like thing or just a feeling of Torah. You say it's more of a societal.
So that becomes transformative to change the behavior.
But it does give you a hint as to how people can rationalize calamities happening either on the individual with you, because you proclaim play that flat out as not to be bad. You say it's nationwide, but people will say such and such happened to the nation, happened to this group of people because they didn't follow. But you're making it very clear it can't be that because they didn't follow Torah. Would you even say that the calamity happened because they weren't kind to each other? They weren't sharing
We
their will?
give Yishayahu, that's all that.
That's great. So you'll say
Remember Yishayahu, don't give me that book? First there.
so calamities can happen
For
because
sure, but because of the lack of soul, this Ariel screams it. All of the things scream it. Calamity happens, Korban happens because of our unjust society. There's the lack of chesed, lack of kindness, lack of thing. It's not good, listen. You pray. We can have a whole wide range of political opinions. It's irrelevant. Those are all legitimate. There's no right or wrong. Different approaches. If you want to prevent calamity, war, and famine, and things like that, by building a just society. When things like happen, it's a wake-up call. We're doing something wrong. What we're doing wrong, it's not. Every group has to ask themselves what we're doing better.
are you okay reading that into world events, whether that happens by man or by nature? So hurricanes versus terrorist attacks?
It's the same thing.
It is, I'm asking.
I'm saying, it doesn't know exactly what you're doing wrong, but something. Remember Shir Kazino?
A bomb destroys a million people, or an earthquake destroys a million people, they're both because they weren't kind to each other?
Yechezkel says it has four malachim that it uses to punish us. He says there's one is famine, one is war, one is natural disasters, one is pandemics and things like that. It's Mufurash in Yechezkel. Now, it didn't say exactly what you're doing wrong, but something's wrong.
Yeah.
And what Shir Kazino says, Shechem lo, but nothing wrong. Now, what we're doing wrong, ask your local level. So if something's wrong, what you're doing wrong, there's never always, like with the sick bay medic, there's never one specific thing. It's a lot, but something's wrong, and you have to fix it. Now, when something happens, you have to protect yourself. When you go to work, to protect yourself. But when you go to the dentist, you have a cavity, you have to deal with the cavity. But when you leave the dentist's office, remember to brush your teeth. Then you can't, but by brushing your teeth, you won't get rid of the cavity. You have to deal with the cavity, but if you want to make sure it doesn't happen again, fix your society. So you don't fight a war by giving tzedakah you prevent the next war by building a just society. The war that you're in, you have to fight and protect yourself. But if one guy to help you in your battle, show him that I'm going to learn my lesson, I'll be better next time. Understand? That's much more difficult. That's called emunah as opposed to emunah.